Hello, everyone. We're ready to start our next panel. My name is Lisa Fleming, and I've been active in the secular community here in Richmond for quite a few years. Until 2016, I was the communications organizer for the Richmond Region and American Association. And then I stopped doing that at the end of 2016 because after the presidential election, I decided I needed to shift gears a little bit. And so, although I've been active still in the secular community, I've put even more focus in the last couple of years into local politics. In 2017, I volunteered for 2 of the House of Delegate campaigns here in Virginia. And then in 2018, I worked on a congressional campaign. And this year, I'm again working on a House of Delegates campaign. So I'm excited to be part of a panel here where we're talking about secular candidates. And on the panel today, we have Arn Ra, who ran for state senate in Texas in 2017. Jennifer Hughes, who is currently the commissioner of the revenue in Chesterfield County here in Virginia. Wynn LeGros, who ran for Congress in Virginia in 2010. And Ron Millar, who's the political impact coordinator at the Center for Free Thought Equality. So we have a couple of rounds of questions. For some of the rounds, it'll be the same question for everyone up here, and for other rounds, they'll each have different questions. So to get started, what I'd like to ask is for Arn and Jennifer and Wynn, if you could give a brief introduction about your background and why you decided to run for office. And then for Ron, although I know you talked a bit about the PAC earlier, anything additional in terms of background or what you'd like to say about the PAC. So we'll start with Arn and move on down.
In my case, in the last few election cycles, the Republican candidate has run unopposed. There would be a Republican primary, and then there would be that determines who the winner is. And so I was determined that this time around that there would be a Democratic opponent. And the people that I was running against are, it's strange that every one of them is a right-wing, end times, young earth, Christian, creationist, dominionist, and they're all so extreme about it. And one of the candidates in the Republican primary criticized the other one for not paying taxes back when that mattered to Republicans. And the response was that my opponent is of the devil. So they're accusing each other. He was inspired by Satan. They're both young earth creationists, end times dominionists, but they're accusing each other of witchcraft. So I thought, okay, this would be actually fun, because I know how infantile, we're talking about people that have the mentality of an 11-year-old bully in the playground, right? So if they're accusing each other of being satanic, what the hell are they going to do with me? But even though I knew that I had 0 chance, at least there was going to be a downvote option. If you wanted to vote for something else, that's definitely me. I'm something else. So there would be an option there. However, because it was the post-Trump thing, suddenly the Democratic coalitions that I was talking with said that they had an unprecedented outpouring of new donations, of new membership, of new support, by financial donations, and so forth. And not only was there a Democratic opponent this time, 4 other guys jumped in immediately after me. So now there's 5 of us for the first time in 20 years, right? There's going to be a Democratic primary in my district. And what ended up happening with that is that one of them was a golden boy. One of them had an actual shot. He was trained, he was primed, he was good at what he does, probably one of the best politicians I've ever seen. And I said, I'm not going to waste money fighting this guy in a primary. He actually has a chance, so I just turned it over to him and bowed out. I can tell you that I was in politics just long enough to know that I don't want to be in politics. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Jennifer Hughes. I'm a chartered accountant, you can tell. I'm an immigrant as well, and I have a pretty conventional corporate background. I started with Ernst & Young 100 years ago. And I've worked for 2 or 3 very large American companies. That's how I got here. I was never politically engaged, although I've always been in Britain, Labour, Liberal, and here a Democrat. I became a US citizen in 2008 because I heard somebody on the radio say, well, if I'm living here, I want to vote for the person who determines how much tax I pay. So I thought that was a good idea, plus my children are US citizens, which allowed me to vote for the first time in the 2008 presidential election for President Obama. Fast forward, ended up in Chesterfield County, and on the 9th of November 2016, my children woke up devastated and crying. My son asked me to take him to school because he didn't want to be laughed at crying on the bus. And in January, I went to a meeting of Liberal Women of Chesterfield County in desperation because I had to do something, because my method of coping is to go do something. And the chair of the Chesterfield Democratic Committee said that there are a couple of special elections going on in the county, one for Commissioner of the Revenue and one for Treasurer. So the next week I decided to run for Commissioner of the Revenue because that sounded more appealing than Treasurer. I hate accounting operations. Chesterfield County, for context, was considered pretty conservative. So I just thought I would be a throwaway candidate, and this was really more for therapy for me than it was for anything else. Well, come to find out that I learned how to campaign, and I won. So I'm not sure who was more surprised, me or my opponent. He's having another shot this year, but that's how I came to be in my position.
My name is Winlet Rowe. I'm the second immigrant up here on the stage. I was born in Quebec, but I grew up in Vermont and Ohio, and I don't remember living in Canada. My father was a Protestant minister. My mother was a school teacher. I admitted to myself that I was an atheist when I was 16, but I couldn't tell anybody. I was the first atheist I ever met. And I was always interested in politics, but never had any plans of getting into politics. Most people my age, when they're asked why they went into politics, they say they were inspired by John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy was assassinated when I was a freshman in college. I was inspired to go into politics by George W. Bush. George Bush is a year younger than I am. He got into Yale and Harvard Business School, not because of his intellect, because of his father. He was a ne'er-do-well till he was 40. He started an oil company that failed. He ran for Congress and lost, and he had a drinking problem. At age 40, he stopped drinking. He got a loan or something from friends of his father and became part owner of the Texas Rangers baseball team, and sold that a few years later and became a self-made millionaire, he thought. And then he became governor and president. And I thought, if that man can be president, I have the qualifications to be a congressman. So I ran openly as an atheist in 2010 against Randy Forbes, the founder and chairman of the Congressional Prayer Caucus. So I'll talk more about that later.
Hi, I'm Ron Millarigan. The reason to run for office, and these are the examples, is to increase our political clout as a community, push the policies that we want to see in the political arena, and also to dispel the stigma against our community. And that happens when people see folks running openly who identify with our community, and they're just like us. And it's a time-honored way to get rid of the stigma and the taboo. So I thank you all for running.
Okay, our next question is for everyone, and we'll start with Jennifer. So, given your respective backgrounds as a science educator, accountant, physician, and academic, all of you are accustomed to making data-driven decisions. Do you find that most voters also make data-driven decisions, or are the decisions based on other factors? And how does a candidate effectively run for office given the different ways that voters make their decisions?
So as I said, I woke up on the 9th of November 2016 astonished. And I think that's pretty much the clearest demonstration we have that people don't make fact-driven decisions when they vote. Right? So politics is very emotional. And facts do matter. You can get elected by lying, but I wouldn't recommend it. Certainly that doesn't work for me. But you have to create an emotional connection. What I found was to get people to vote for me, I had to build a relationship in 10 seconds, and I had to show up, right? That's the feedback I got. I was a Democrat running in a very Republican, running in a Republican environment. I had people say to me, "You're the first Democrat I ever voted for because you showed up and you shook my hand." So that is really critical, is to get in front of people, and from my perspective, get in front of them, be authentic, be a person of integrity, build that relationship first, and then people will be willing to listen to you, and they will set aside, that they may be willing to set aside some of their other preferences to actually get to talk to you. That's what worked for me. I did not run on politics, but I didn't have to. I had the advantage of running for a role which required skills and experience, and so I was able to demonstrate very quickly, once I'd built that relationship, that I had the skills and experience to perform the job. So show up, build a relationship, follow up with facts.
There was a time when I used to weigh each candidate based on the policies that they held. But in recent years, the Republican Party has just gone off the deep end. There's not a division in policies. They're all cloned to think exactly the same and vote exactly as they're told. They appear to be completely owned by the fossil fuel industry, and they're going to do everything they can to, or the evangelical movement, so they are going to be taking away other people's rights. So my choice of the candidates lies down to the independents and the Greens and the Democrats. And unfortunately, the Greens have also kind of lost their mind and don't have any good representation as far as somebody that actually has a policy and a chance. So I've been forced to vote Democrat, which fortunately I have a decent number of options this year, don't I? I voted for my state house representative, not because she showed up at my door to get my vote, but actually because I already agreed with her policies before I met her, but that certainly did help, meeting her in person. And I don't know what else to add to that, except that I've seen people adopt politics the same way they adopt a religion. I mean, in Texas, there was a rally that we attended for education, and it was mostly Republican teachers that were there. And they were saying that if you want to vote for education, you must be prepared to vote against your own party, vote for the other party. Because in Texas, there are a lot of Republicans who believe that they are born into their political party and that they owe loyalty to that party as a birthright. And so it doesn't matter what the policies are. It's whichever one is opposed to abortion, that's the only thing that matters.
Well, I think if you ask most people if their vote is fact-based, they would tell you that it is. But you have to understand what fact-based they're coming from. And as I mentioned, I grew up in the north. I moved to Emporia, which is about 70 miles south of here, to open my medical practice about 40 years ago. So I sort of had the northern mindset. Now, my wife grew up in Emporia, and she at some point let me know what the mindset was down there. And I mean, I graduated from high school in 1963. If I had graduated from high school in Emporia in 1963, I would have graduated from a segregated high school. Brown versus the Board of Education was 1954, and they didn't integrate till about 1964, which blew my mind. And my wife also informed me that to many white people in Southside Virginia, the Republicans were the white party and the Democrats were the black party. And that arose probably from the Civil Rights Movement in the 60s, Voting Rights Act, and that was sort of the way people looked at it. And then when Barack Obama was elected in 2008, that confirmed it. You had the black party and the white party. So if you're white, why would you vote for the black party? So that was sort of the mindset that you're dealing with. And then the other thing, of course, being, if you're African American, why would you vote for the atheist? So I'll get to that later.
Sadly, a large portion of our population don't vote, and that's a very sad fact. We get maybe into the 60s in presidential elections. We get down to the 40s in midterms. And Chicago just had a really important election where there was an open seat for mayor. There were a dozen or more candidates running, and they had near record low turnout. And so showing up is key. And I can't agree more with Jennifer about building relationships, because people do have preconceived worldviews, and that's going to drive how they vote. Those who are fairly apathetic, though, will reach out to opinion makers and ask them who they should vote for. But, in the D next to your name or R will also get you a block of votes. But building relationships can change worldviews, and that's what is dependent on us breaking through the stigma for atheists and humanists.
Okay, so for this next round of questions, I actually have a different one prepared for each person, and we'll be starting with Wynn. As you mentioned earlier, you ran as an open atheist against Randy Forbes, who was the founder of the Congressional Prayer Caucus. So can you tell us a little bit about how religion impacted your campaign?
Randy Forbes, when I ran, had been in office 9 years, and he would put a column in the local newspaper intermittently. And in one column, he wrote something to the effect concerning the First Amendment. The First Amendment guaranteed freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So that was his mindset. And when I ran against him, he was interviewed in a number of newspapers and on television, and he had one line that he used repeatedly. Referring to me, he said, "He attacked me for being a Christian. I never attacked him for being an atheist." So that was the number one. It was a lie. I never attacked him for being a Christian. My father was a minister. My wife is Lutheran, so I'm not going to go attacking Christians. But what was interesting is no reporter ever asked the follow-up question. How did he attack you for being a Christian? Because there was no example. I never did. But the mindset was that if I was an atheist, I must have done that. So there was no point to ask a follow-up question. And what I did attack or go after about him was his intention of inserting religion into the government. Now, he proposed a religious history week and introduced a bill that there would be Religious History Week in the United States the first week of every May. And there was sort of a tsunami of whereas clauses And if you read through, you found one that said, whereas the Holy Bible is God's Word. So his intention was clearly to establish religion and get people to vote for that, and then he could say, see, we accepted it. The Holy Bible is God's Word, we're a religious country. And the other way he fought against me was by totally avoiding me. The League of Women Voters scheduled a debate between the two of us, and he refused to debate me. Whenever we had joint appearances set up, he didn't show up. And he'd been in office 9 years. He knew he could just run out the clock, which is what he did. So that's what I was up against.
All right, next question is for Ron. There have been many efforts to undermine the Johnson Amendment, so could you tell us why the Johnson Amendment is important and comment on the efforts to undermine it, and maybe let us know what steps we can take to ensure that it's not weakened?
The Johnson Amendment was put in place in the 50s. It directs the IRS to investigate and potentially remove the nonprofit status for nonprofits and religious organizations who endorse candidates or appear to endorse candidates. Trump made it part of the theme of his campaign, and in the prior Congress, the House voted twice, putting an amendment on funding bills to remove the Johnson Amendment in one form or another. Both of those were killed in the Senate because there are calmer minds in the Senate. Now that the Democrats have taken over the House, we won't see that again. So I think efforts to kill it legislatively are off the table. I mean, sure, people are going to introduce standalone legislation, but it won't go anywhere. But the key for this is that, you know, we can't have religious groups acting as super PACs in elections, because they don't have to file 990 reports to the IRS like nonprofits do. So they could be just this invisible source of funding for candidates. And so, you know, it is very important that this legislation stays. Sadly, it's not been operable for 3 presidents now, because I think Bush 2 put into place that only one senior person in the IRS could respond to complaints, and that was a political appointee. I don't think that changed in the Obama administration, and of course Trump strengthened that with another executive order when he took office. So it's not, essentially it's not being enforced now, but if we maintain the legislation, get another administration into office, we can make sure that you know, we won't have religious super PACs.
Okay, next question is for you, Arn. You mentioned earlier that you ran in a very red district, and I know that they engage in historical revisionism, they support religious intrusions into public education, put forth bills that discriminate against marginalized communities. So how do you connect with voters whose worldviews are so different than your own?
That was an enormous challenge. I wanted to schedule a debate with my opponent. I wanted to have these debates even before I announced my candidacy, because his platform position was in making sure that trans people couldn't pee. That was his ultimate priority. And so I wanted to envision myself going up on stage next to this guy and challenging him on this point about what happens when your slightly masculine-looking aunt has to present her ID before she uses the ladies' room. What happens when your emo son has to present ID before using the men's room? And just how ridiculous are we going to be about this? What the hell does it even matter? Right? I mean, I was in what is the name of that museum in the Netherlands? I forget. But there's a huge museum. There we go. Thank you. I was there, and there's all these women working in the men's room, right? And it's, who cares? What the hell is the big deal? And literally, there are more Republican politicians and clergymen molesting people in the bathroom than there have ever been for trans people. I don't think there's one recorded case of a trans person molesting anybody in the bathroom, but we have clergymen doing that, and they tend to be Republicans.
Okay, so Jennifer, how much did your constituents care about your technical competence versus party affiliation versus perspective on religion.
So religion never came up, ever. In fact, it never even occurred to me. I ran on technical qualifications. So my elevator speech was, Jennifer Hughes, chartered accountant, 30 years of Fortune 500 experience. I want to bring my business experience to modernizing the office of the Commissioner of Revenue. And that resonated. And that's what I went with time and time and time again. Since I've been elected, I have noted that religion infuses Chesterfield County local government. If you walk around my office, my staff, at least half my staff have religious aphorisms in their cubes. The first month I was there, because I was completely new, I was still in review mode, if you like, watching how things worked. The chief deputy, who has since retired, thankfully, invited one of the staff to pray, to say a prayer before our Christmas dinner. Well, after I'd peeled myself off the ceiling, metaphorically, we don't do that anymore. But to me, it's astonishing. It really is absolutely astonishing. But in answer to your question, never came up. It doesn't come up now. I respect other people's religious beliefs, but I just don't. To me, it's not important to what I do and the service I provide to the community.
Okay, so this next round of questions, everybody has a different question again, and I'll start with you, Ron. For candidates running in religiously conservative areas, does the Center for Free Thought Equality tailor its recommendations on how they should approach their race?
Actually not, because we really want candidates to run as their authentic selves, whether it's how they identify and the policy positions they're pushing. Because the Republicans have been a great example in this. The political spectrum has moved far to the right because they have been running candidates hard on right-wing positions, and it's moved our society, sadly, to the right. So it is really important that candidates run on the issues they care about, because hopefully those are the issues that their community is going to care about, or it's a way to educate people about why these issues are important. And again, running as your authentic self is so much easier than trying to hide behind something. And so we always want our candidates to be comfortable with whatever secular or non-theist ID they use. We're good with a range of identifiers. I was talking to a candidate in West Texas, and he was like, I can't possibly come out as an atheist because, I already lose. He was in this really red district. I don't think a Democrat had gotten more than 25% of the vote in the past 10 years. And he said, I lose so many people when I identify as a Democrat. I lose a bunch more people when I tell them I'm pro-choice. Then I lose more people when I'm LGBTQ friendly. He said, what's going to happen if I tell him an atheist? And so that got me to think, is like, well, what would happen? Haven't you already lost anybody that you care about at this point? And so we actually commissioned with AHA a poll just to test that question, and have found out most people don't care, especially if those are your political issues. The vast majority don't care. You might lose, some people might be less likely to vote for you, but then on the other side, there's another 8 to 12%, depending on what term is used, that are going to be more enthusiastic about your campaign. So, I'm very glad we did that poll, because it sort of shows that the atheist taboo is diminishing and is gone in certain sectors. And even, one of the questions we asked was, do you, if a candidate agrees with your policy positions, would them being an atheist or an agnostic bother you? And in every demographic, even Republicans, we hit the majority that wouldn't matter, that they were more focused on the policy issues. So we're moving forward.
Okay, next question is for you, Arn. Given the pluralistic society in which we live, could you comment on the importance of separation of church and state?
Nobody's a stronger advocate of the First Amendment than the atheists. And it's funny that I phrase that the way Trump phrases everything. Nobody does this better than me, right? Nobody believes more in the Constitution than I do, believe me. Except that he's done everything that he can to overturn every provision of the First Amendment. You know, freedom of speech. He wants to bar. He wants to hold the press accountable for reporting against it. He wants to establish religion. He wants to suppress other religions. The same thing's going on in Texas. A year or so ago, they wanted to pass a law that would prohibit Sharia law within Texas. And I'm arguing, well, you don't have to do that. The First Amendment already prohibits Sharia law in Texas. But the problem was that they wanted to ignore the First Amendment and also pass a law that promotes Christianity. And they wanted to establish Christianity. And I'm sorry?
That's the definition of Sharia law.
Yeah, so exactly. And when we were at Standing Rock, right, I saw a change in the country happening. And it was interesting seeing it happen because Obama was still president, right? Trump hadn't won. Nobody expected Trump to win, but we were expecting what we did see going to Standing Rock. And the reason I went to Standing Rock is because I was talking to people in this room, trying to tell them what was going on there, and they didn't know that it was going on because there's no news about it. There was no CNN, there's no MSNBC, nobody was up there. Deliberately, nobody's up there. Who's up there? Democracy Now! Right, and their reporter ends up she was arrested and charged 45-year felony for reporting the news. Now she ignored the threat, returned and went to court. Now she was out of state, so she could have gotten away, but she returned and went to court over this. And her and another reporter who was also charged with the same thing managed to beat those charges. And I saw the president who was invested in that pipeline, and Hillary was invested in that pipeline, and Trump was invested in that pipeline, and I see how corrupt our country is. And it was interesting to see when we're reporting, and there was somebody from ex-Muslims of America that went up there with me, and he was doing this report as well. We were interviewing all these Sioux representatives in a secret off-site location where we could get an internet connection because you can't get one from the facility. And all these people that are privately trying to get the news out about this because the major news media isn't going to cover it. And we finally see Obama back down and realize this is a losing game. So we're going to prohibit this. This isn't going to happen. And then of course Trump wins, reverses everything, pushes the pipeline through anyway, pretends he never knew about it when of course months earlier he did. And then what happened? As everyone predicted, the pipeline ruptured. 50,000 gallons of oil into the only water supply these people have. They have to buy bottled water, which means they have to drive 50 miles to a store to do that. And we were so close to seeing a major change in this country that the country was trying not to allow to happen. And then somehow, because people always want to say, don't vote, it's a broken system, don't contribute to voting, abstain by not voting. And that's how we got where we are. So thank you, all you guys who said don't vote, you fucked us.
Okay, so Jennifer, being originally from England, how would you compare the effect of religiosity in England versus the United States in the political arena?
So I don't even know where to start. So in Britain, now, so Britain is made up of 4 countries, right? It's a mainland, I'm speaking for mainland Britain. So religion is considered personal, right? It's not something, you don't bring it into the public sphere and into public policy, right? You don't identify, from a Christian perspective, you don't identify as one of these Christian sects like you do here, where you mentioned your wife is Lutheran, and then people have said to me, yeah, I'm Presbyterian, and I'm Methodist, and I'm going, I don't know what the hell that means, really. And so, which is ironic, because the Queen is actually the head of the Church of England. And so in terms of politics, religion doesn't come into it, right? Now, There is certainly, in Britain, we have our fair share of Islamophobia, and if you're Muslim or if you're brown in some way, you do stand out as being of a different religion. But it's certainly not a feature in public policy, if you like. It's different in Northern Ireland, where sectarian conflict has really torn that island apart for hundreds of years, and so I can't really comment on that, but certainly, there is an enormous divide between Protestant and Catholic, and you do identify by religion there. You can be a Christian and still believe in science. The concept that you wouldn't believe in science is completely foreign to me. I mean, I have to tell you that, when I first got to know Rob, and, Rob has this, tremendous intellectual interest, and he's done a lot of research on this, I thought it was quite quaint, and then suddenly come to find out that it's really critically important, because there are crazy people like the ones that you're talking about who get elected, and so I don't even know what to say. My family would be surprised that one would even have to have a conference like this. So, just saying.
Okay, so Wynn, we had a panel yesterday that spoke to the entrenchment of religion within the Black community. How did your atheism go over with the Black voters in your district when you were running?
Well, just to start off on this previous topic, I decided up front I was going to be open about my atheism. I figured, why the hell not? It wouldn't be any fun if I didn't, particularly considering who I was running against. But concerning the African American population, I was advised by, I had many campaign managers. There was a turnover there. Not to run openly as an atheist. I met one of the Black leaders. He said, you can't possibly run openly as an atheist. That's the basis of the African American population in the church. You can't possibly do that. And I said, well, thank you. And I ignored him. And so when it finally broke, there was a headline on the front page of the Virginian Pilot, the big newspaper in Norfolk. In God, only one trusts. And it was about the race between me and Forbes. And the campaign manager I had at that time was upset that that was the big story. And I thought, why the hell not? Things aren't going well. Maybe this will stir it up. And so I read the article, and they quoted Lionel Sproul, who was an African-American member of the Virginia House of Delegates at the time. He's now a state senator. And I had talked to him previously, and he said, well, normally I take candidates around to the Black churches to introduce them, but I can't do that for you because you're an atheist. And I said, okay, fine, don't worry about it. I said, can you introduce me at other places that aren't religious? Oh, sure, I will. That didn't happen. And then there was a comment by the Reverend Jake Manley, who was a Black preacher in Chesapeake, a big church, and he said, I couldn't possibly vote for a candidate who doesn't believe in a higher being. And I said, well, how do I deal with this? And so I called him and surprised him, obviously, and talked to him a while and seemed to be warming up a little. And I said, well, what if I come over and talk to you in person? He said, well, okay. And he told me on the phone he was 87 years old. So I sort of pictured this wiry little guy, and I went in there, and he was twice my size. And so we sat down, and I brought my Lutheran wife with me and my African-American campaign worker, who I never asked him about his religion, but he frequently wore a cross around his neck, which was fine with me. And the preacher had his associate pastor with him. So we sat down, and we talked for an hour and a half. And it was the most interesting conversation I had in the whole campaign. It started off, he asked me, well, don't have any rules to live by. Aren't you going to rape and murder? And I said, well, haven't yet. And then somehow he brought up the devil, and I said, well, I don't believe in him either. And he said, oh, well, good. Of course, he believed in both. But if I didn't believe in God, he didn't want me believing in the devil. So it hinted to me he equated a devil worshiper with an atheist. And I said, I was taught the golden rule. I try to live by that. There's no mention of God or Jesus in the golden rule. And how I'm much more interested in how we treat one another rather than what we say we believe. And things progressed and progressed, and finally he said to his assistant pastor, we need to get this man elected. And so he's going to set me up to talk with a group of 40 pastors before the election. And it got close to the date, and I called him on the phone and said, how are things going? He said, well, we already had the meeting. I think Lionel Sproul got to him because there was a relationship there. And we decided we're not even going to mention it from the pulpit. That people do as they will. So that was the end of that, but it was an interesting get-together.
Okay, so I think we have time for one last question. It'll be the same question for everyone. We'll start with you, Arn, if that's okay. So about a quarter of the people in our country identify as not religious. And if you look at the younger generation, like people born after 1980, it's about a third of the people identify as not religious. So although we have a lot of people who identify that way, I don't feel that as a voting bloc in the U.S. we don't have as much influence as perhaps we could. So any thoughts that you have on how we can sort of consolidate and harness that secular energy we have to move the country towards a more secular government?
As an official representative of American Atheists, I'm down with the Atheist Out program to get people to admit what atheism means. Now, while I do identify as humanist and I understand the value of that, I identify as atheist first because I want people to understand it. And my own dearest friends have said to me, just because I don't believe in God doesn't mean I'm atheist. Right? But exactly, yes, that's what that does mean. And when I started out as an activist around about Y2K, there were only like 3% of Americans that would identify as atheists, and there were only like 10 to 15% that would identify as unbelievers. And I've seen the numbers go up, and I remember that Madeleine Murray O'Hair observed many years ago that the majority of atheists in this country call themselves Methodist or Presbyterian or whatever, and they're sitting in church every day. I've had Christians tell me, not kidding, that I believe in Jesus because that's what I want to believe, not because I think it's true. Right? Or I have to believe in God because I want to know that I'll see my dead father again. Well, see me that. I don't know how do you justify that. But people have told me that why does it have to be true before I believe it? Why can't I believe what I want to believe? Why, even if it isn't true? Well, why would you want to believe something that isn't true? But for everybody that acknowledges that they don't believe in a God, that's what they need to understand. That probably the biggest misconception is that an atheist is not someone who knows that there is no God, or not necessarily so, because I know there's no God. But there was a long time before I knew that, when I just didn't have enough information, so I consider the possibilities, but I'm not convinced, right? So if you're not convinced either way, that doesn't mean that you're agnostic. Well, it can mean that you're agnostic, but it also means that you still don't believe, right? Obviously, if you withheld your judgment, you still don't believe, which means you're still an atheist. So you being an agnostic atheist, however you want to, strong, weak, whatever, it doesn't matter. I want people to realize that we have a common interest. We do have the disbelief that we are, an atheist is anybody who's not convinced that an actual deity really exists. And another way to put that is that we're the only ones that aren't playing the make-believe game. And so we have that one commonality where the truth actually matters, where we want to understand what is really true rather than pretending things that are not true. And I guess I'm rambling on too long, so I'm going to get that.
So we're talking about engaging the millennial voter, if you like, the 18 to 35, the people who don't vote.
And just voters in general who are secular. There are so many of us out there, but it just doesn't feel like as a voting bloc we have as much power or influence as we could.
So I think, my first reaction to this is being a secular voter isn't a platform, right? And so And so it's hard to get people engaged around something that's not exciting and that doesn't grab them, right, emotionally. Again, it goes back to, politics is emotional. And so, to me, things like the environmental issues, climate change, are aligned with secular thought in this country, at least, because there appears to be a difficulty from some religious people in separating the two. And so it's about, I think, presenting a platform. It's about presenting a platform that engages people, that has a fundamentally a secular base, like climate change, like women's rights. To me, it's the democratic platform, right?
Okay, one other thing I would add is if you see somebody that is running openly as an atheist, send them some money. The worst part of running for office, as far as I was concerned, was sitting there calling people on the phone asking for money. I hated it. They said, you'll get used to it. I didn't. I hated it. I talked to a retired congressman. I said, do you miss being in Congress? No. Because I had to make those damn calls. So send them some money. Don't even make them ask for it. And the other point, I listened to some podcast recently, and they were talking about the exception, right word. People accept same-sex marriage, and the percentage of that has gone up dramatically in just the last 10 to 20 years, faster than anyone thought it could, because gay people came out. They were everywhere. And atheists are everywhere. Like you said, they're in the choir, they're in the pulpit. They're not telling anybody, but they're there. And if the more people we can get to come out, I think the easier it'll be. But it's a challenge because it's threatening if you got a business or something.
Well, I think it is exciting from Sam and Larry's presentation about ACEs. And the more groups that do that become more politically active, we're going to attract more people into our community because people do want to be working on issues that affect them. And, it's very clear, the candidate questionnaire that I sent out to folks deals with the issues that wouldn't be political issues today without the religious right. And it's the integrity of science, including climate change and evolution, reproductive rights, medical aid in dying, LGBTQ equality. And I think that resonates. And so the work that the local groups can do and the national groups can do is exciting as we move forward. The Secular Coalition, I have to shout out to them because they're doing some great work in organizing Democratic caucuses at the state level. They have one in Texas, I believe in Utah, they just got one in Nebraska. And so that's showing that the Democratic Party, that our community exists, we're an important factor in the political arena, and that raises our political clout, raises the issues that we care about. And of course, we happen to have a political action committee, so join the Center for Free Thought Equality. I think I've mentioned it's free. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you, all of you, for being on the panel. Really appreciate all the insight and information, and let's give everyone a round of applause.